fine. Last time we did 1, 2, and 3 straight through. This time we're jumping and skipping over a couple, just because of how I saw the style of writing that Patty Jo puts into her book, and what I thought would be most applicable to your ability to get something taught in a meaningful way. So we're going to start with Standard 4. If you look at Standard 4, we're talking about some interpreting and some analysis, and so we're interpreting words and phrases, and we're analyzing word choices. So this one is actually specifically looking at what an author does in order to get their point across, and looking at their specific word choices. So for that, we do have some graphic organizers, but we're going to talk first in terms of when you talk about this with your students, you want to be able to explain to them the difference between denotation and connotation. Anybody in the room know the difference between denotation and connotation? Aha. Good. One's literal and one's figurative. Very good. So the way that I remember that is denotation is the definition. So denotation, definition. It's a literal connection between the word and how it's used in a particular sentence. If it's connotation, then the meaning has color to it. It's a little bit different. So those are kind of my key words for remembering the difference between denotation and connotation. Is the denotation is the definition, and the connotation is slightly colored or changed by how it's used in a particular sentence. And then you can see some figurative language tools up there that you might be able to teach your students through the way that a particular person writes. So what's the difference between a simile and a metaphor? Sure, which one uses like or as? Simile uses like or as, and a metaphor does not. Okay, so that's nice and quick. They're both comparisons. That's pretty straightforward. When we talk about allusions, anybody know what an allusion is? Nope, but I like your guess. If I allude to something, that means that I'm making mention of something that should be known to other people. So if I said he's as tall as LeBron James, I'm making an allusion to somebody. Is he tall or short? He's tall. And you know that because you know that LeBron James is tall. So I made an allusion to a famous athlete. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so that's when authors make reference to something out of history or pop culture. You know, she gets arrested as much as Lindsay Lohan. How often does the person get arrested? Often, right? So you can make those kind of comments, and authors use those kind of references. Sometimes they're historical, and sometimes they are out of things like pop culture that might, or it could be up to something else in another piece of literature. Alliteration is when an author uses the same letter over and over again in order for it to sound musical. So when we think of tongue twisters are great examples of alliteration because they use, you know, she sells seashells down by the seashore, those kind of things. When you have all of those shush sounds and sis sounds, it's making the writing sound more musical. And then imagery. What's imagery? What's the author create when they write with imagery? Pictures. Very good. They create mental images. That's all the more sophisticated that one is. Good. So we've got a couple of graphic organizers to go over with this today. And again, you're going to get these this PowerPoint in an email from Nancy when I remember to send it to her, and she'll remember to send it to you because she's good about things like that. And then you'll have access to these electronically. So the first one that we have is called denotation versus connotation. And it literally says, you know, what's the quote from the text, what's the literal meaning, and what's the figurative meaning? What's the definitional meaning, and what's the meaning that has some color or change to it? Nice and straightforward for doing word choice. On back of that, you have language impact, which literally also has quotes, and then what's the impact of them on the meaning? So did the author use an example of alliteration, rhyme, or repetition? Or it could be any of those others that we just talked about, and the students would write down quotes from the text and the impact that they have on the meaning. It might be that the person uses really good imagery and paints word pictures really well, and the person really clearly understands what the author is trying to say. So take a look at Standard 6. We're moving on to the next standard. We've got assess how point of view or purpose shapes the content and style. So we're talking about point of view and purpose. Point of view and purpose for standard 6. When we talk about these things, when we talk about point of view, we have first person and third person. In first person narration, what kind of words is the author going to use? I, good. I, me, and we. Very good. And in third person, then you're going to see what? They, or he, and she, right? Okay, good. So just making sure we're clear about those two things. And the idea here with point of view is this. Think about this question for a second. Can a first person narrator be truly neutral? Oh, I'm seeing some head shakes. Why not? Because they're involved in the story that they're telling. Whose story are you telling in first person? Yours. You're telling your own story. Are we ever completely unbiased about our own lives? Absolutely not. I'm pretty darn sure that I'm always right. And based on that, I'm not neutral. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, good. So when we talk about author's purpose, we're digging into that idea of bias versus neutrality. When we talk about author's purpose, I give you the acronym PI for 3 different types of author's purpose. The first one is to persuade. If someone is trying to persuade you of something, they're trying to get you to act or think differently than what you've done in the past. Is a persuasive narrator biased or neutral? Biased, sure. Why? Because that's right, because they're only showing their side. Good, so that's really good. So then the next one is inform. So the next purpose is to inform. If we have the purpose of informing, all we're doing is giving information. Here's some stuff I want you to know. You're not trying to persuade anybody to think differently. You're just giving out some thoughts, some food for thought. So can an informative narrator be neutral? Should an informative narrator be neutral? Absolutely, good. And then the third author's purpose is to entertain. So it could be that when we're talking about someone who's trying to entertain, you really want to have an emotional response. So it could be that they want you to laugh, it could be that they want you to feel sorry for them, it could be that they want you to feel compassion for what they've gone through, that kind of idea. So when you think about the book Under the Influence, was the book written, the parts that you've read so far, to persuade, inform, or entertain? Inform, absolutely. The parts that we've read so far, Patty Jo was simply providing some stories. And she's providing them in a way to illustrate her points. Very good. So we've got a couple of graphic organizers for author's purpose and point of view. The first one is analyzing an informational point of view.